I'm going to call to order the Friday, December 14th, 2018 meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. And let's see, who should be our happy leader of such a thing? How about Mr. Collins? Would you lead us in the pledge? Thank you. The next item listed on the agenda is acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence. I think we'll do that after we come back from closed session. So, Council, if you would alert us to what we're doing in closed session today.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Item 4A, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1. That's the case of Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 17ZV4540. That's a pending litigation matter. 4B, also conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1. That's Marina Community Partners, LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 18CV871, also a pending litigation matter. And finally, 4C, conference with legal counsel, potential litigation, one item, Government Code Section 54956.9D4.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on any of the items that we'll be discussing in closed session? I need to be an owl so I can turn my head all the way around. Thank you. Seeing no one coming forward, we will recess to closed session and return as soon as we can.
See? All of the state folks are down here. There's Bill's chief of staff right there.
But what I'm saying is the legislature in session, that they could vote on something.
Yep. Not right now. I'll ask.
Okay, I'm going to reconvene the December 14th, 2018 meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. The board has met in closed session, and I'd like to ask council to report any action taken.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members of the board and public, the board did meet in closed session, heard from Authority Council, and discussed the matters at item 4A, conference with legal counsel, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, pending litigation. There's nothing to report out there. Item 4B, conference with legal counsel, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, also a pending litigation matter. Board heard from counsel, and there's nothing to report out there. And finally, 4C, conference with legal counsel, potential litigation, one item. The board heard from counsel on that item, and there's nothing to report out on that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Supervisor Parker,
Here.
Supervisor Phillips, Supervisor Adams, Mayor Edelin,
Here.
Councilmember O'Connell, Councilmember Morton, Councilmember Hoffa, Mayor Oglesby, Councilmember Wizard, Mayor Carbone,
Here.
Mayor Gunter,
Here.
Councilmember Garfield,
Here.
Councilmember Reimers,
Here.
Kathleen Lee, Toby Uptain Villas, Erica Parker, Todd Muck, Dr. Diffenbaugh, Larry Samuels. Who's here? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see him come in. Dr. Ochoa, thank you. Colonel Ford, Bill Collins, Dr. Tribley, Lisa Reinheimer, and Dr. Moore. You have a quorum.
Thank you. I would just, before we move to announcements and acknowledgments, I do just want to welcome back a returning FORA board member, Mayor Oglesby, in a new role in his city, and welcome our newcomer from Seaside, newly elected Councilmember John Wizard. So thank you for... Thank you for joining. Yes, that's right. That's right. She thought she was going to get away from us, but no.
I gave my goodbyes last meeting, and here I am again.
Excellent. Welcome back. Yeah. Super. That's terrific. So we'll move now to acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence.
Yes,
Mr.
Chair,
Hular.
members of the board, today just have three items. The first being that there will be a veteran town hall that'll be coming up on December 19th at 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the Major General Gorley VA DOD Outpatient Clinic. This is going to be executive leadership from the VA Palo Alto Medical Health Care System to do a question and answer session for vets and active military in the region. Second item is for the holidays, Fort Ord Reuse Authority offices will be closed from 2:30 p.m. on Friday the 21st and will reopen on December 26th at 8 a.m. And then the third item is I have some good news for one of our members and bad news for the rest of us to announce. The good news is Dominique Davis has taken a position with the city of, well, I'll let you do the announcement.
I have taken a position with the city of Santa Clara, and so I will be going there in January. And I just have a few things. Can I say them? Thank you. I spent a lot of time at this table listening, so I get to say a full sentence now. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate and have sincerely enjoyed my time at FORA, and that it has been everything that I had hoped it would be for me, both professionally and personally. And when I started my job at City of Seaside in the public sector, I really had no idea what I wanted to do other than earn a paycheck. And so, but since then, I've really developed a deep sense of commitment and pride for the contribution that I can make to my community through my work in public service. And so there are no short of challenges or challenging people, but it is rewarding in ways that can't be compared to really any other line of work. Having a front row seat to the discussions and the dialogue between the board, our members of the public, and all the incredible people that I work with, it has really fueled my ambitions And I'm proud to say that I'm a product of my family and my city of Seaside and this county, that I was able to get my start in public service right at home. And I hope that one day my ambitions will allow me to return home in my career. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dominic. We wish you well. It's been great having you here as a steady presence, and your responsiveness to requests via email and phone and everything else. And we will miss you, and we'll look forward to seeing you when you come back. Yeah.
More than the rest of you know.
Great. Well, thank you. We will move now to the consent agenda. Is there any member of the board who would like to pull an item for question or discussion? Yes.
Page 10 of the staff report, that the clerk look at the motion and the vote that's referenced as being unanimous. I don't think that is accurate. I'd appreciate it if we could just bring this back next month, if there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to comment on any of the consent calendar items? Anyone in the public wishing to raise a question or make a comment on any of the consent agenda items? All right, so I would, if the board is amenable, I would entertain a motion to adopt 7A, B, D, E, F, G. Does it go on to the next page? Thank you. There's a motion and a second, and then with the understanding that 7C would come back at our next meeting. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. Next, we'll move to business items. The first is land use covenants, our report for this past year.
Yes, Chair Jonathan Brinkman will provide a very brief report in this regard. I think he just has a 3-slide presentation. It's important to note that this is one of those many things that Fort Ord Reuse Authority does annually, that on the next item we might be discussing who gets it.
Chair Parker, members of the board, I have a brief presentation here. We've completed our FY 17-18 fiscal report for land use covenants. I'm just going to give you a few details about FORA's role in this process and the jurisdiction's role, and open up for questions. So I'm going to hit 4 topics today. The reporting requirements, where do those stem from? What are the types of the land use covenants? Who are the reporting entities, and then what's the reporting role transition? So just briefly, there's a land use covenant MOA. Back in 2007, the FORA board authorized that MOA with DTSC, and that created our reporting requirements. It was part of the Army's remedy for transfer of these lands, working with DTSC and EPA. And so here's just a summary of what's required from that agreement. The reporting entities have agreed to complete these annual reports and submit those to FORA. FORA has agreed to compile those and submit those to DTSC. Also, the reporting entities have agreed to reimburse DTSC for its oversight costs. That includes if they come down for a site visit, their staff time to review the reports for completeness. And then FORA also invoices with its annual membership dues 15% of DTSC's costs just for the administrative cover of coordinating with the entities and DTSC. The oversight costs in FY 16-17 were $8,432. Just wanted to inform the board of that information. Okay, so about the land use covenants themselves, we have a groundwater covenant on the base. That's largely from hazards into the near ground aquifers from motor pools and other issues historically. We have a landfill covenant on the base. That's the consolidated landfill south of Imjin Parkway. There's a 1,000-foot buffer around the landfill for sensitive uses such as residential or other uses. And then we also have soil land use covenants. That's from munitions and explosives of concern. That's primarily concern there is with digging. So just want to show a series of maps here. These are where the covenants are. These are deed restrictions on the property. This is for groundwater. So everything in crosshatch in blue on the map, which also shows UC lands, CSCMB lands in pink, and MPC lands in yellow. So that is where the groundwater land use covenants are. This is the landfill located in the county. And then these are the soil land use covenants. You'll see there's one north of the airport in Marina. The rest are largely in Seaside in the county and Delray Oaks as well. Okay, and then on the reporting entities, this is the list of the 8 reporting entities. I gave a special highlight to the County of Monterey because that is the transition role in the MOA. So the FORA's role would transition to the county as provided in the MOA. And on an annual basis, it's dealing with, coordinating with all of the 8 reporting entities, getting the reports in the past fiscal year about any concerns on the use of this property. So I'm available for any questions the board may have.
Any questions from board members on this item? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public. Any member of the public wishing to comment or raise a question on this? All right, I'll bring it back to this board for action. Just for receiving. That's the kind of action we can really get behind. Excellent. We will then we'll move to business item 8B. This is to adopt a transition plan resolution. Mr. Hilmar, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, Chair. I think the Chair. I think you've indicated a desire that we get some presentations from the various versions of resolutions that you have before you. I know several of the board members have offered at least 6 different approaches as to how we address this, but the current recommendation from staff is to find that approval of a transition plan is an organizational change and not a project subject to CEQA. That's an important part of the actions today. The second is to approve a transition plan resolution and set a special meeting if necessary for December 19th if the transition plan or a transition plan and its resolution are not unanimously approved today, and authorize staff to take appropriate action to comply with state law requiring submittal of an approved transition plan to LAFCO by December 2018. During the course of reading, I know every single line on every single page of the 157 in your packet, plus the additional items that you've received, which included 3 different transition plans, some comparisons between the transition plans, letters that we've received from stakeholder groups, Landwatch, Keep Fort Ord Wild, and others, notes from the administrative committee meetings of 11/29/2018 where they reviewed all of these items. And I'd like to note that in addition, on our website, all 120 plus documents that are the background to this have all been made available to all the board members and the public. This culminates 3 years of activity regarding the transition plan, including innumerable meetings with our colleagues from the state of California that lead us in legislative actions, as from time to time their oversight on this has been very helpful. And so that's what you have before you. And Chair, if I remember correctly, it was your desire that we start with a presentation by Sherry Damon, giving an overview of what has been called the staff transition plan, which is in here, and then there would be some effort by, I believe, Mary Adams to provide a report on one that she has submitted for the board to consider. We received that late yesterday, and then there's another transition plan and a modification from the city of Marina, and I believe the city manager is here, or the eloquent man himself is behind me. So I think that we're set to do that process if that's your desire, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, so let me just map out what I thought we'd do here. First, we will hear from Sherry Damon, who will present the FORA, the most recent iteration of the FORA transition plan. And then I will invite board members, if you have any questions to clarify what you've heard. Then we will hear from the City of Marina on their FORA transition plan, what they've been trying to achieve through that. I've asked them to keep that to 5 minutes or less, and then if any board members have specific clarifying questions for them, you can ask them, and we'll try to get those answered. Then we will ask Director Adams to speak to the plan that she and her staff have put forward for our consideration, again, up to 5 minutes, and then if there are any specific questions that board members have about that, we'll get those answered. And then I thought at that point it would be useful to hear from the public. Oh, by the way, the Parker Garfield and Hoffa plan, we're happy to just have the discussion be limited to the others. We feel that ours has been, what we were trying to do has been done better by others, so we're happy to not take 5 minutes to tell you about ours. Then once the clarifying questions have been answered on each of those three plans, I'll open it up to the public to get any questions or comments that they may have for us, and then I'll bring it back to the board for discussion and deliberation and perhaps an action. So with that, Ms. Damon, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Parker, members of the board. Sherry Damon, Prevailing Wage Coordinator and Risk Manager. I prepared this as an overview of all the plans in my report, so I didn't actually specifically prepare based on what I thought I heard you just say, that you wanted me to only focus on the 12.6 FORA version. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and I'll elaborate on the 12.6 a little more. So overview, I was going to provide a brief update on the updates, the facilitator status, and the alternative resolutions. So since November, I can honestly say I've been rather busy. I've met with the agency attorneys as you directed twice, not once, but twice before Thanksgiving, and got some of their comments related to some of the legal issues, not policy. We're very focused on legal issues. We met with Landwatch representatives and their legal counsel, KFOW representatives and their legal counsel, and we also met with the administrative committee, and we heard all those comments, and we prepared a revision which is in your packet. The 12.6 FORA version is in your packet, and that is the recommendation for adoption today, where it says a transition plan. That would be the transition plan that FORA staff is recommending. We've also received many written letters since November, and in particular to the three versions that are in your packet from LAFCO, the county. We've received comments and questions, so I'll try to address those as I go through. Facilitator. You know, we put out an RFQ. We thought we were going to get some responses. That didn't happen. The executive officer has started a telephone canvas, and I believe has a couple of very good possibilities to retain a consultant to help in the facilitation process if that is still needed. But I would note that during the administrative committee, your administrative staff with the relative jurisdictions seem to be working very well together and addressing many of the issues, as you can see from the notes of their meeting. It was broad, comprehensive, and how to really implement and roll their sleeves up to implement a successful and smooth transition from the organizational structure that we have today to the one which will be in place in 2020 or after June 30th, 2020. So alternative resolutions, there are 4 in your packet. There's also the red lines, but you have the FORA 12.6 version. You have a list of amendments / errata on your dais with trying to incorporate some of the issues that have been brought to staff's attention. One of the things that's happened since the November version is Exhibit A has been renumbered. So there are some document numbering issues that didn't get caught all the way. The numbers have changed. So I've tried to catch those. They've led to some confusion, and I'll go through those more specifically. You have the GHP version, which I understand I will not be talking too much about. Out of the running now. The City of Marina 12.5 version, and for your reference, because the Executive Committee wanted you to have lots of information and choices before you, the October 29th version is there. That is what we referred to as the starting version, based on Senator Monning's work from one version. So that's why that version is there. And you can see we've come a long way, baby. That's what I think would be the summary of all the versions that are before you and that we're trying to work through. So let's talk about the 12.6 version. I'm going to break it down in parts, and this slide doesn't really represent all the parts, but it is in my staff report. It's broken down by recitals. It's a rich background of recitals. How did we get here today? And that started a long time ago, and I know some folks think that that might not be necessary background. But when you're building an administrative record and you want to make sure that the entire story is told, this information is information that you don't really want to have lost in the overall process. If you look at your errata sheet, paragraphs B and C in that recital deal with water and wastewater. Those are paragraphs that Land Watch specifically wanted some background on the water and the wastewater. I thought that was fabulous, and so we added it back in, which actually made our recitals a little longer than we would have liked, but I think they are valuable information and background documents, and that is reflected here. The next major section in this resolution is section 1, and those are your background findings and determinations. This is where your legislative intent, some of your legislative intent is. What is it that we're trying to do with this transition plan? And I'm not going off the slide here at this point because this is a more full analysis. There are some minor modifications to section 1.1, the base-wide facilities. And in particular, we have added language that says this transition plan assigns all assets and liabilities relating to FORA's policies, programs, and mitigation measures. It's an issue that was raised by Land Watch and others that we didn't make an appropriate assignment, so we've just clarified that. Our attorneys are telling us we didn't have to do that, but we think this makes it very clear. We also provides a schedule of obligations, and the schedule of obligations in this context is Exhibit A. You have a rich list of contracts. The entire approach of the 12.6 version is to provide a rich framework, a rich background, and a framework for the transition plan implementing agreements so that things don't get forgotten or lost in the shuffle. That if you choose to negotiate and not address something, you can, and this plan does allow for modifications and that kind of flexibility as we move forward through the process. And, you know, executive officer, I think, or somebody said, you don't know what you don't know. And I think this is a process that we don't know all that we don't know. We know a lot. We know where all our documents are, but it's like peeling an onion. And I am reminded about that from one of the letters, for example, that we got, which was from the Monterey Salinas Transit, who sent a letter and said, hey, what about section 2.2.6 on transportation? What happened to my buses? Well, that's one of the problems that happens is when the FORA financing program goes away, the money that would have been spent on replacement buses goes away. And we noted that in the program, that you're going to have to negotiate how that revenue generation and sharing takes place to address the loss of the community facilities district. So just trying to keep that in mind. One of the other changes is in paragraph 1.4. We've added similar language to all assets and liabilities relating to those policies. Section 1.3, we've eliminated the word continue on the implementation agreements. With respect to water, we've added some language suggested by Landwatch related to the possibility of a water supply shortage, what happens, and how will Marina Coast work with the jurisdictions to develop a plan to address that in a fair and equitable manner. Paragraph 2.1.7, we've tried to clarify that Seaside is FORA's successor, intended successor for purposes of the environmental services cleanup. It's an issue that was raised by the county, so we've tried to offer some language there to clarify that Seaside is going to be succeeding FORA in that endeavor. We've corrected the document number in section 2.1.9. Couple of document numbers just to update it. I mean, you know, you remember those spreadsheets, right? They're big. They're 11 by 17 spreadsheets, and there are a whole bunch of documents in there. And when they got more documents were added, the numbering changed. So some of the numbering in these paragraphs has to be updated. Thought I caught them all, but we've also added the word to in that same 2.1.9. Paragraph 2.2.6, we have tried to clarify an issue that was raised by the county as to the confusion about the TAMSI and MST lead agency. It was never intended that TAMSI would be the lead agency for the Davis Road projects or the City of Marina projects. What I was trying to say there is that not to lose them, that TAMSI and MST both have lead agency projects that should be addressed in the transition plan implementing agreements. So I've tried to make that more clear. I think the second sentence makes it a little more clear that we need to talk about that and see if we can't get to some agreements. Also have clarified the footnote relative to the amount of money that FORA has paid toward reducing the CalPERS liability. It was erroneously put in here at 1.6 million. It's actually 1.16 million that FORA has placed towards reducing that potential liability. Making sure I catch everything here. And I think those are the amendments that we would recommend today if you were to move forward on the 12.6 version. I will note that we did not address the LAFCO request or the County of Monterey request regarding the escrow account or litigation management and the amounts and the time length, how long those amounts would remain on deposit at this point in time. But we do believe that there's enough flexibility in this plan that if you wanted to change those amounts, first of all, they're not budgeted as of today. You would have to think about that. Those are things I think you could change with respect to the escrow account and with respect to the litigation management that would not provoke a CEQA issue in terms of creating something other than transferring and assigning the entire FORA project. So I just wanted to call that out. So going back to the transportation, just to finish the slide, with respect to transportation, We've tried to take an approach that clarifies the lead agency approach and coordination. It's a hybrid between GHP suggestion, coordinating with the lead agencies. We identify the lead agency approach, which is as outlined in our capital improvement program. That leaves 6 projects that are FORA projects. The idea here is that if nobody wants to take on those projects, and those 6 projects, just so you know, for transportation, South Boundary Road, General Gym intersection, which is a phase of South Boundary, Giggling Road, Eucalyptus Road, Northeast-Southwest Connector, and what's my 6th one? Inner Garrison. Those are the 6 that are currently listed as FORA lead agency projects. So we would hope that during the transition implementing process that the underlying jurisdictions would raise their hand and say, I really want that one, I think we need this one, I don't, so that when we move forward, and hopefully we can get some consensus, and maybe the administrative committee will have some input on that. But as we move forward in those transition plan implementing agreements, if nobody wants certain roads, that you come back in your final year CIP, you reevaluate at those roads that are being taken out, what happens to the rest of the roads, so that you can make an informed decision about your priorities, whether you want to leave those roads, put them in as a lower priority, how you want to deal with it. But it gives you flexibility to do it, and it provides a framework for the evaluation. And then all dollars remaining in the CFD, except to the extent otherwise identified. So remember, your habitat dollars are CFD dollars. They are set aside right now in your CIP for habitat. So we want to be careful. Not every dollar can just, from the CFD, can go into one thing or another, because the way this program is set up, it identifies by paragraph certain pots of money for certain things. Like, it has an amount of money for habitat. It has an amount of money for the pollution liability insurance self-insured retention fund. And just a note about that, this plan specifically addresses the self-insured retention, your pollution liability. FORA is the first named insured. It has an $11 million coverage. Self-insured retention amount, though, if there is a claim, is $500,000. So one of the issues that you might want to address going forward in your next budget cycle is whether or not that self-insured retention fund should be increased to help minimize the $300,000 plus or minus gap if there is a claim. And that is something that probably should be addressed as we move forward through the transition plan implementing process. And I understand we're kind of in the weeds, but you wanted me to go through the plan, so I'm trying to go through the plan here. We have a rich list of contractual obligations and a schedule that's contained in Exhibit A. It provides for modification of the plan, and our CEQA Council has concluded that because we address everything, it's not a project subject to CEQA. I'm just going to go over this one. This one's an agreement to agree the GHP version, and no need to really talk about that one. The Marina Plan summary, because I know you're going to get a more full discussion of that plan. It does provide a minimal recital section, so it takes a different approach. It does address assets, liabilities, and obligations, but it doesn't assign them. Landwatch notes that in their comment letter that it's not an assignment, and all the reasons why they believe that that approach is an okay approach. It relies on deed restrictions and future agreements. Just a note, the deed restrictions on Fort Ord do not apply to all lands. They only apply to lands that FORA has transferred. The base reuse plan actually applies to all lands, and all lands that develop are subject to the base reuse plan. So there's a lot of examples where the restrictions don't apply. UC and CSU. So we have a situation currently where UC just sold a piece of property. It's not encumbered with the deed restrictions, for example. It is covered by the base reuse plan, and it has to be developed in accordance with that. You have several seaside transfers. The golf courses aren't deed restricted. Sun Bay, Brostrom, the Stillwell Kidney transferred outside. It didn't transfer through FORA. It transferred from the Army directly to Seaside. So there are some gaps in the deed restriction approach. It does not include an Exhibit A, but I understand the intent was that because it is FORA's plan, or it's being offered as a potential plan for FORA to adopt, that it would be FORA's Exhibit A. So that would be the same Exhibit A that you have before you. I think there was some, whatever. I'm not sure it was 100% clear by some that that was what was intended, but I'm saying that that was the intent. It doesn't address the pollution liability insurance. It doesn't provide for amendment. It does have the, tries to limit some of FORA's future acts because it only wants you to do certain things and not other things. But that being said, I'm not going to go through much more than that. The 1029 version that's our first starting version. I think it could be adopted. We would recommend not leaving in the CEQA exemption language. The way this was originally structured, we structured it as not a project, but if it is a project, then it's exempt from CEQA. And comparing and contrasting to the Marina Plan uses the CEQA exemption language. There may be some issues relative to noticing that before you could even think about adopting that, because FORA, before it acts on a project that's exempt from CEQA, is supposed to take some noticing actions. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that unless anybody raises their hand and says we really want more. No? Okay. Yeah. So future actions, what we are seeing is future actions. We are hoping to be able to transmit a transition plan to LAFCO prior to December 30th of 2018. The administrative committee is working on evaluating Exhibit A. And again, because the 12.6 version has the modification, we have the ability to go through and refine it and make updates as we move forward through the process. I think that's an important thing. We expect to bring to you, FORA staff, a resolution of intent to terminate the CalPERS contract in January. Need to get that started. The retirement law requires a 1-year notice period, technical notice period, and the transition plan requires that we have the actuarial evaluation no less than 6 months prior to FORA's dissolution. So that means we're getting started early. Also, because we want to know that information as soon as possible, hopefully by your next budget cycle. As we move forward, we want to refine and get that information as soon as possible. And we also anticipate bringing a list of other things that need to happen and the dates that we would like them to happen by. So there are agreements that need to be transferred, and we know some of them, like the Environmental Services Contract Agreement. That has to go through several approvals. It has to go through Army approval. It has to go through Department of Toxic Substance Control. It has to go through EPA. For all I know, it has to go to the big guy in the White House himself to sign off on that. I'm hoping not, but you never know. That takes time. There may need to be some legislation. I don't know. But the sooner we have that and the sooner we introduce successor staff to the people that we need to make those relationships with and move forward, the better off I think we all are in terms of making sure the transition is smooth handoff to the next one, whoever that's going to be in to deal with that. Still some key issues out there. The 12.6 version tries to minimize those issues and encourage collaboration and agreement as we move forward. But there may be still some of these same issues, and these same issues are across all of the plans. So I think there are different approaches in each of the different plans that you have, which is a hard thing to harmonize when you're trying to blend everything together. I would just say that it's very hard, and I will apologize to Supervisor Adams because I prepared this before I got your version, so I didn't prepare a slide for your version. I do have some comments. Some of them are the same comments that I have on the City of Marina's comments, because I did notice it is a blend, and it's trying to pull some of the information from Marina's resolution in. So, and I would be the first to admit that it's very difficult to provide a full analysis, on that. And so the FORA staff recommendation is that you move forward with the 12.6 version to submit to LAFCO by December 30th. If it's not unanimous vote, we would recommend setting a special meeting on December 19th. That's next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. I know it's going to be everybody's favorite and fun time of year to do it, but that would be staff's recommendation. Direct us to transmit to LAFCO with the LAFCO indemnification agreement, and to begin the facilitation process. And I would note that the admin committee is already scheduled to meet on December 19th, so they are beginning their work. The implementing process, I would characterize that as the implementing part of the implementing process is starting to be refined. So that, I think, concludes my presentation.
Thank you. So now is a time for board members to ask any questions you might have for any issues or questions that didn't get clarified through the errata, just on the FORA staff transition plan of December 6th. Yes, Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you. On paragraph 1.3, you deleted the word continue. Are we to assume that by deleting the word continue, that you're saying the implementation agreements are not assignable, or is it still the position that the implementation agreements are assignable?
All this language says is exactly what the case state of the matter is today. That as of today, the implementation agreements require a fair and equitable contribution. It does not answer that question.
So that nowhere in the document are we addressing the question of whether or not it's assignable?
I did not address that, but in terms of making the finding about handing off, the assumption is that there has to be some way to be financing the program going forward.
Thank you. On page 11 of the latest version, 2.2.6, you make reference to the reimbursement agreements shall terminate on June 30th, 2020, unless they're addressed in the transition plan implementation agreements. Why is it that it's considered the reimbursement agreements will terminate unless something happens, where the implementation agreements are considered, at least through authority council, to be assignable?
I think that's a recognition that the reimbursement, the funding for the reimbursement agreements comes from the Community Facilities District, and that's why it's in there. I think the board could choose to either prioritize these in its final year CIP or make other arrangements to pay these post 2020 as a debt obligation, maybe.
And finally, the LAFCO concerns relating to 300,000 and increasing it to 500,000 in 3 years to 5 years. Do we have any problem with looking at that?
I do not believe, although subject to confirmation by authority council, and I don't believe that if you increase that to 500,000 and you change the length of time to 5 years, that would implicate a CEQA issue.
Is it?
As of today, so it wouldn't change the project's status that this is not a project.
Am I to understand that let's assume we increase it to 500,000 and it's for 5 years. Am I to assume that after 5 years, the money would be distributed even if there was still litigation pending, or would it still stay in an account?
That's actually not how it's drafted. It's drafted that if the litigation is completed. So if there's still a need for that, what is not answered by this language, though, is if there is litigation pending and LAFCO is expending more than $500,000, that question is somewhat of an open question.
Okay.
As to who is the successor to, pay LAFCO.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Director Morton.
Thank you. So on page 11 in the transportation and transit, I do see that you have some consistencies with what the marina plan is, but going down to the portion about where you say shall be analyzed to ascertain the impact on ORD communities that you're doing a study so as to inform the last year's CIP. So the question is, if you're informing the last year's CIP, how is it that you would have time in that last year to fulfill whatever it is? What is your intention for the use of this information?
I think my thought process there, if you're asking what my thought process is.
Well, whoever wrote this, I'm asking.
My thought process was that there might be certain roads that really nobody wants. And as a priority matter, showing what happens when those roads are taken out and there's all of a sudden an increased burden on, let's say, Del Monte Extension, because that now becomes a new thoroughfare, that information could be considered by the FORA board in moving forward as to prioritization, funding, etc., as it moves forward. And it might also change the prioritization of the other projects that are not being addressed.
So the study would be done this year, before June of 2019, or before May, when we look at our CIP for the following year? I'm trying to figure out when this is happening too.
Well, yes, and maybe no. I mean, you might choose, even though we normally do a capital improvement program in June, there have been years where the capital improvement program actually has been deferred till a later time. So the idea is that whatever the next capital improvement, there's going to be one more capital improvement program, that this information would inform that last program so that you can make your final allocations, and that allocation might even be the plan to say, you know what, we're not going to do nothing else on transportation, we're going to put everything over in habitat. We don't know that, but it could be, because the capital improvement program is not only 2.2.6. It's not only transportation. It's water, it's habitat. So you have a whole bunch of different moving pieces. This was a way I thought might work to move us through what I understood was one of the main issues, or an issue relative to transportation, and acknowledge some home rule and lead agency status, calling out the other issues with MST and TAMSI, who will be maybe short on funds.
Okay, so those, whatever information would be garnered and implemented by FORA in its last year is what your intention is with this?
If the board chooses to do it, it's an informative document. Here's what happens if you don't do these 6 projects. All of a sudden, intergarrison, CSU and intergarrison are swamped. All of a sudden, there is traffic through Broadway because everybody's jumping off and goes through Seaside or goes through Marina. That information would be provided, because it would be a fuller study than what we normally do.
So then, referring to question 2.2.9, late discovered items, you again make a distinction that if it's related to land, it's going to be an obligation of the underlying landowner.
Mm-hmm.
but if the liability or obligation is unrelated to the use of real property, then in fact you are stating that any liability would come from future property tax revenues, and that would be tax increment, correct?
That is correct. The way I've got it, if it's a liability, and liability here, I'm using it in a term of art, is it's a money obligation that we somehow didn't identify. It's an after discovered. We have tried to be very thorough, but, you know, this organization's been around for a very long time, so.
So the question that I have, if it's a lawsuit that's filed prior to 2020, prior to FORA going away against FORA, for a board action such as we've been sued and are currently being sued for acts that are alleged CEQA violations, if in fact there's a recovery by a third party for attorney's fees against FORA, you're suggesting in your plan, in this plan, the FORA's plan, the proposal, is that tax revenue, tax increment would satisfy any judgment for attorney's fees.
That's not how I've drafted this. We've tried to address the pending litigation separately. There are different results depending on which litigation it is. This is really designed for after discovered documents. But it could be, you know, like every piece of legislation, like every plan, it could be, I suppose, subject to the interpretation that you're offering. I wouldn't foreclose that necessarily.
So the other distinction that you made, and I'm just trying to clarify, and I know it's the distinction between the Marina plan and the FORA proposed plan, that you said our CEQA language is somehow relying on a CEQA exemption.
Mhm.
And in fact, our CEQA language does not rely on a CEQA exemption. Our language says not a project and or is exempt. And we rely on the same language that FORA relied on, the same rationale that there's no change on the environment and it's a change in the organization. And that it's a distinction without a difference is what we're trying to point out. So I think your interpretation of our plan is a misinterpretation.
And
so thank
that-
you for making that comment.
Right. So, yeah, I think that's something you can bring up when you're talking about your plan. Anyone else with clarifying questions on, yes, Dr. Moore and then Mr. Wizard.
So on the very first page in item C, which is about water, which starts out talking about the water rights that came from the Army's agreement, but about halfway down there's a sentence that begins the easements to FORA, and I believe that refers to the transfer of the entire water and wastewater system through easements and property transfer that went to FORA on October 23rd, 2001, and then was further transferred to Marina Coast 3 days later. There's a sentence there that says the easements required the obligation to provide water required by the Habitat Management Plan. Now, those easements were 100 pages of legal descriptions of the entire water and wastewater system. It's been a long time since I've looked through them. I do not recall anything in there that requires, for instance, Marina Coast to provide water for the Habitat Management Plan. What I recall is a requirement that Marina Coast, like the land use jurisdictions in its ownership of this water and wastewater infrastructure, would comply with the Habitat Management Plan. So I'd love to see some clarification of that. I don't know whether I just missed something in reading these documents and that buried somewhere in there is a requirement to provide water for the HMP, or whether this is just not quite accurately phrased.
Thank you.
So that's a question.
Yeah, I actually cut and pasted it from the easement document. I tried to stay very close in the recitals. It was one of the critiques of some of the recitals that we weren't exactly right on the language of the document, so I tried to pull the language right out of the document. I'd be happy to show you and
Please.
There's 2 easements and they use slightly different language, just so you know, on some of those obligations.
Thank you. Director Wizard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarifying question that item 2.2.9, the late discovery items, specifically refers to those contractual obligations. That is identified in the schedule of obligations, which is Exhibit A?
No, 2.2.9 is supposed to be covering, it's kind of like your blanket cover. So things that maybe slip through the cracks. There are 127 plus or minus documents in that schedule of Exhibit A, but there could be something buried in a contract somewhere that I just don't know about. I tried to be very thorough and catch everything, but this is supposed to be your catch-all. What happens if it's discovered, in 2021? Let's say you discover something in 2021 that everybody missed. That's what this language is ideally supposed to be, kind of your catch-all, and the process for what happens for things that you find out about after the fact as you move through the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members with questions on FORA's plan?
I did have one additional piece of information.
Sure.
The county asked me to discuss the health and safety code.
Yes, I was going to ask you that one, so good.
Okay, good. I wasn't going to provide you with any legal interpretation, but we do have a handout of the actual language of the health and safety code, and this is what it says. Upon dissolution of the authority, the amount allocated pursuant to this section, which is the tax increments section, shall continue to be paid to the accounts of the authority insofar as needed to pay principal and interest or other amounts on debt that was incurred by the authority. Funds that would be allocated pursuant to this section that exceed the amounts necessary to pay the debt on the authority debt shall be divided as follows, and then it provides a formula for how you divide it after you pay the FORA debt. And so I'm not offering anything other than that. I know that I have talked briefly with City of Marina's council about this issue. There may be some limitations on this, on what these funds can be used for, but to date, the funds have been treated as a pass-through from the county to FORA, and that's the language that we rely on.
Thank you. And my other question, I had two others, but you took care of one by striking the word continue, or continue to, in section 1.3. Thank you. And then I was puzzled by, in paragraph 2.1.9, this is about it's about some parcels that won't transfer by the time FORA sunsets in June 2020, and there's I think the second sentence says FORA is entitled to receive certain easements to enable implementation of the reuse plan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't,
So-
does that mean after 22? I wasn't clear, and then when I went to look up the citation, of course, it was the wrong document, so it was extra confusing.
I apologize for
Yes.
that confusion.
Thank you for the clarification now that
And
it's
the
127.
document that's referenced there is the Economic Development Conveyance document. In the transaction between the Army and FORA, the Economic Development Conveyance document has a list of easements and other things that FORA is entitled to. It also has an assignment clause, and it allows for successorship. So those are what I am referring to there, is that whoever is the successor, the LRA successor to FORA, and has approval by Army, will be able to inherit those contractual benefits.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, and I think the county staff had a couple of other questions, but I think you've addressed them through the errata, so thank you. Great, so with that, we will move to, why don't we hear from representatives from the City of Marina about the Marina's transition plan for FORA. Thank you.
Thank you very, thank you very much, Chair Parker and members of the board. It's been a long 3 years as we've gone through this process together, trying to get to this point to adopt a transition plan and move forward with the not only the sunsetting of FORA, but moving forward with the continuing of the base reuse plan and the master resolution. I wanted to point out just a couple things on background. Back in September, we submitted a 20-page document. We went point by point with the FORA transition plan at that point, and with that document, the intent was to point out our concerns about the content and the enforceability of that document, and we had concerns about the additional obligations and fees that it was putting on all the forest jurisdictions. Our transition plan right now is very different from that document. What we took was FORA's transition plan, and then we modified it to make it what we think is more enforceable and will actually facilitate things a lot quicker. Sherry Damon, she referenced our Exhibit A, and it's blank, and she assumed that our intent was to have all those contracts, and that is absolutely correct. That is our intent. It is a long document, and rather than make a mistake and leave something out with all those different contracts or a mistake of a typo, our intent was just to list it very clearly, FORA's contracts, and that is our Exhibit A. But if there's a desire of the board to list that, we can certainly go back and take FORA's Exhibit A and do that. But Sherry Damon was correct in her reference. That was our intent. Our proposed plan, we believe, gives all the land use jurisdictions the best opportunity to implement the base reuse plan and master resolution. Our plan addresses the unique issues of each community, including economic development, affordable housing, blight removal, autonomy, habitat protection, regional cooperation, and fiscal sustainability. As our admin committee, we had a great meeting led by FORA as a 6-hour meeting, and we talked about that and working together on these various issues and brainstorming how we can work together as cities to move forward this plan, and had some great ideas, and I think we are going to continue to move forward. One of the things, we have a marina staff and City of Monterey staff are working on the contracts. We're going through those and trying to understand those better, and we're going to bring those back in our meeting on the 19th. We've met with LAFCO, Monterey County, TAMC, the environmental groups, and other land use jurisdictions, and we believe that after meeting with them that Marina's proposed plan addresses all the issues and concerns of these groups and resolves the conflicts. From these discussions, we are not aware of any stated objections or impediments to the implementation of our plan. I want to highlight out a few areas that our plan differs and strengthens and improves the FORA proposed transition plan. The first part is the findings of facts and circumstances. This section draws on various conclusions of staff and we think is unnecessary and opens up the door to concerns over interpretation, accuracy, and completeness if the plan is challenged. By eliminating this, we believe that any disputes as to the content is avoided, and this will help in securing approval of the transition plan. Another major area that we differ is in Section 1.3, revenue sharing and financial contribution. The revenue sharing is legally disputed by many jurisdictions, and it will be challenged if the plan is approved. In Marina's plan, the jurisdictions have the ability and the incentive to enter into multiple transition plan implementing agreements to address sharing revenues to fulfill obligations. And I think MST, some of their concerns is exactly what we're talking about here. Section 1.4, the reuse plan and master resolution. The base reuse plan and master resolution are protected in the Marina plan, including the critical areas of prevailing wage, affordable housing, and the jobs housing balance. The base reuse plan and master resolution are recorded deeds against title and have consistency determinations made by boards of each land use jurisdiction's general plan. Section 1.5, funding of habitat protection. Marina's plan provides for a clear and simple path to fund habitat protection. That's a critical element of these plans. We also provide for alternate plans and different mechanisms to fund these if needed. Section 1.7, transportation and transit. The FORA plan continues on-site improvements, and not referring to regional and off-site roads. Section 2.2 of the Marina Plan gives land use jurisdictions the discretion and the ability to determine when, how, and what roads need to be constructed. Marina's plan has buy-in from the environmental community. The discretion lies with the local jurisdictions to determine when and if to fund or construct any particular road or transit project, and the ability to enter into agreements for shared funding. If you go back to, this is the whole problem, we have that one graph you've seen of the 194 million of revenue coming in that says you're going to get 67 million from property tax and land sales, and 72 million from entitled projects, and 55 million from proposed projects. And we can tell you right off the 67 million from land sales and property tax, for Sunset's property tax is going to go to the other jurisdictions, and so there's no way you're going to hit the 67 million with that. Land sales to date, including all of East Garrison, the Dunes, Sea Haven, everything has totaled 11 million, and so the plan here assumes we're going to be making 40 to 50 million in land sale revenues, and to date we're only $11 million, so there's no way. Then you look at the entitled projects, $72 million. There's no way you're going to hit that target. We project with our entitled ones, and we know exactly, we track where they are, and we're at maybe 25 million by 2028, 2029, but there's no way that you're going to hit, we're going to hit 55 million at that point. And then you have 55 million in proposed projects, and those are way down the road. I think 20 million is Delray Oaks, and 26 million is Seaside. And again, there's problems with water and housing caps and all kinds of things. And so when you look at that, there's no way that the revenue is going to be there. And so the problem then goes back to the expenditure side. You have 45 million allocated for habitat. You have 132 million allocated for construction projects. And so if you're really only going to be getting 75 to 100 million of revenue, and if habitat really is top priority, that's 45 million. That leaves maybe 50 million remaining for construction projects, and that's the problem. That's why we need to have the flexibility to step back and say, what roads, what's the important? Oops, that wasn't me. So that's why we think our plan really needs the flexibility to step back and say, what roads do we need, which ones do we need to eliminate, and the ability to sit and say, okay, do we need to do some revenue sharing with other jurisdictions? MST wanting to replace their buses. Well, if you're 50 to 75, 100 million short, do you think those buses are ever even going to get replaced? So we think we have a better option there. With CalPERS, the Marina Plan provides more protection by requiring approval of the Monterey County Auditor Controller of any proposed use of future property tax increment. And we agree that CalPERS is a top priority that needs to be funded. Marina's plan provides excess funds once you address the CalPERS obligations to be provided in the following order: habitat protection, under construction roads like South Boundary. I think they have 5 million allocated now and 7 million next year. And then fulfill remaining reimbursement obligations on a pro rata basis if there's not sufficient funds. Marina's plan, we believe, is within the authority of LAFCO to implement. We believe our plan addresses the concerns raised by the attorney groups. We believe that our plan addresses the objections raised by environmental groups related to water and roads. Just in summary, we think that we have a plan that will legally move forward that meets everyone's needs, and I mean all the jurisdictions' needs, and we think it provides a clear path forward. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions from board members on any items within Marina's transition plan for FORA that need clarification? Yes, Mr. Hoffa.
So one of my comments that I had brought up at the last meeting relative to your Marina's former plan had to do with habitat, and I have the same question for your revised plan, which is, as I read the habitat language, it talks about the money, if I understand it correctly, only being used for habitat management. Why, I'm wondering why you chose not to permit habitat permit takings as part of that.
So, and that's a good question. The wording that we've used is habitat protection, and it's to keep it absolutely open so that if an HCP is approved, then the money will go to that, because we absolutely support HCP for the takings issue. But if for some reason that falls apart, then we want those funds to revert back to the habitat management, and then they get prorated based on that.
Thank you. Anyone else with clarifying questions? Yes, Mr. Wizard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you elaborate a little bit on the formula by which this pro rata distribution will happen? Is it a dollar for dollar, every dollar you put in, you get out? Is it a percentage of how much habitat you have? What is the calculation?
We don't have a calculation, but that is something that we need to look at. As we talked with some of the other jurisdictions, including LAFCO, I think one of the key parts of 2019 really is to work together and exactly work out those details. What is the correct pro rata share? Because one of the things we've talked about, not so much on the habitat end, but is on maybe the roads end, is that like in Marina, we have a lot more available habitat, and so pro rata reduction of us we can handle, versus somebody, if your baseline is really low, a reduction there has a severe impact, and so we want to acknowledge that, and those are issues we definitely want to work out.
Great, thank you for the questions. Anyone else? Clarifying questions? Yes, Mr. Huff again? Sure.
So this has to do with, I think it's 2.4 building removal, and it's a bit of a sticky wicket to ask, but maybe this would be a question for our legal counsel, actually. But so if I'm reading this, it says, FORA, prior to its dissolution, shall complete those building removal projects for which it has assumed responsibility and for which it has funds available. So I guess my question is that referring specifically to the building removal, which is part of the base reuse plan FORA was assigned responsibility for removal, or would this be related to the lawsuit involving Marina Coast Partners? Would that somehow could that be interpreted as being FORA's responsibility? I don't know who should answer that, but.
So may I answer? So what it's referring to is that in our capital improvement program, we have budgeted $9.6 million. That is to cover, that's an estimated amount, to cover the cost of removal of the stockade, which is a project that this FORA board has assumed as within its scope and responsibility. And it's a monetary contribution that it would fulfill to the city of Seaside, which if that check has not been written, or checks, that would be paid. So that is what the scope of what this board has in its CIP for building removal.
Okay, so just to clarify.
As FORA being responsible, and that's what we're referring to.
So to clarify, it's building removal projects that are part of the CIP. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members with clarifying questions for the Marina Transition Plan? All right, thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation. And we will move now to the Adams Plan.
That sounds a little grand, and certainly not what was intended at all. What we attempted to do is put together a compromise plan, and we started with this FORA staff plan, and then which included the GHP, which I think of as the Garfield Hoffa Parker plan, but GHP works great. And then we rolled in Marina. And what we did, we had three priorities in mind, and that was the thing that mattered to us the most. And the priorities that we had as we looked throughout this is that CalPERS was the top priority. The second priority was in construction FORA-led projects, example, the South Boundary Road. The third was habitat, and not unlike Marina, we just kept the word habitat, thinking it could be habitat management, habitat, HCP, or an HMP. And then the fourth was any pro rata reimbursement that would be available. So those were the 4 priorities that we had. We were of the mind that simpler is better. There are a couple of areas where I feel we could flesh it out a little bit more, and we've talked to a few people about things that could be fleshed out. But my belief is that having an appendix or an attachment that is the full history of FORA, those sorts of things should not be included in our opinion, in a transition plan. A transition plan should be getting from A to B. And in our opinion, it should be something a bit more simple. So as you go through this, and I apologize for this. We sent it out yesterday, late afternoon, so I know none of you has had an opportunity to really read it and to, sort of try to comparison, and you probably don't even have questions that you could ask because you have not had the opportunity to digest it. But there were several different points that I wanted to bring out. And one was the question that has been brought up about the water and wastewater. Example, we thought we put in just the more of an attenuated approach, but maybe we should add FORA 1.8 for history. It's just another paragraph or 2. Another area, everyone is genuinely and appropriately worried about CEQA. So what we did in Section 3 for CEQA, we took the first half of the forest staff language around CEQA and then merged in the marina commentary. Those are just an example of some of the things that we put together. My hope is, honestly, this is something that most people would agree to. It's benign, but it covers the most important parts of what it is that we need in a transition plan. And it is, what will the priorities be? How will they be assigned? And how can we move forward? My belief, and the other people with whom I worked, which would primarily be Yuri Anderson, is that the letters, after we get this submitted to LAFCO, then we start to flesh out what are the letters of agreement, what are the different memorandum of understanding that need to be crafted, but they do not need to be part of transition. That's something that I think we've got another 2 years to work on. But we have, by law, a plan that can get us through December 31, 2018. If you have any questions, I will be happy to attempt to answer them, but I would look backwards to my trio of people back there who have been working and reading and making a lot of notes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time and effort to put something together. Are there any questions from board members to help you clarify any questions that you might have had as you read through the plan? Oh, hush. It's it actually, for some reason, it arbitrarily starts beeping at 4 minutes. I'm not quite sure what that's about. So anyway, it's its own internal threshold. Any questions from board members? Yes, Mr. Hoffa.
So my question, again, has to do with the habitat portion. And I'm just trying to understand. So basically the 21 million we've currently budgeted would be transferred to the habitat conservation plan if that were passed, and if that weren't, if a JPA were created, Habitat JPA, the money would go to that. And then if neither of those events happened, it would be dispersed to the jurisdictions on a pro rata basis. And I think as Mr. Wizard pointed out, if we were going to go with this or the marina plan, we would have to probably clarify what the pro rata basis was. But the question, which really,
sorry, as long as those as long as CalPERS had been met.
Okay, right. But my question, and this was really based on input from our staff after I asked them about this. What if, in order to create a JPA, what if one of the land use jurisdictions chose not to participate? Would the existing 21 million go into that, whether all jurisdictions choose to participate in a JPA or not? And I guess my concern is, what if a jurisdiction chose not to participate as a way of blocking sort of this going forward? So could you speak to that? Is the 21 million definitely, if 2 or 3 jurisdictions decide they want to form a JPA for habitat, they're going to get the 21 million? Is that the situation?
Our marina plan is, I think, almost identical to.
To the language
so
that we put in.
I would be happy to answer from the perspective of, because your language adopted our language. So the concept here is we're hoping that we have a federal and state agency that approves an HCP. We don't know whether that will happen or not. So you have something outside of our control, but we have to have a plan today. So our plan is, if in fact we get that approval for a base-wide take, and a base-wide take means that every jurisdiction benefits and has the ability to not have to do incidental take permits. So it would be inconceivable you would have a base-wide take without all the properties being a part of that. The other thing that's coming in front of the FORA board is, what is the program, the Habitat Conservation Plan? How do we fund it? What is the organization for that? That's something that October, the last board meeting action was to have staff continue to meet with all of our jurisdictions to continue to work forward on that. So you need those two things to come together for a habitat conservation plan. If that fails for either of the reasons that not everybody can agree on what that should look like, we are already contractually bound by an Army-County agreement that we have habitat management plan that we have to take care of. And that agreement was made, we have had this responsibility for 25 years to date. And we need to then look at how much of that 21 million that we're anticipating going to be there is necessary for a habitat management plan. And the standard is a less costly standard for a habitat management plan. So the 21 million may fully fund that as opposed to needing 48 million for a habitat conservation plan. But every jurisdiction would then be required to do an incidental take permit for development. So the plan, how it's written, is let's go for the gold standard and try to achieve that. But if not, we have the flexibility to go with what we're already contractually bound to do. And whether that's by a JPA, that some memorandum of agreement for implementing that, or how much money gets assigned. The county has 1,285 acres of habitat management area. Marina, I believe ours is 208 acres. We should not get the same proportionate share of money. It probably should be allocated based on acreage. But our plan says that the FORA board is going to develop what that is before we sunset.
Yes, Mr. Gunter.
We've heard a lot of the plans, and I appreciate everybody's enthusiasm, especially some of the land use jurisdictions. But I think at some point before this board goes much further, we need to hear from LAFCO. What do they expect? Because if they reject all these plans, where do we stand?
I agree with that.
And
yeah,
time-wise, I'm just worried about time-wise. If we have at 5 o'clock, we got to make a decision on this. So.
Okay, and we need to hear from the public. So this is where, if people have no further clarifying questions on the plans, yes, sir.
Madam Chair, FORA board, just from the Army's perspective, there's two things we're concerned about. Is one, voice for us to work with one entity like we've done before with FORA going forward, and two, resilient utilities. Water obviously the most prominent for us. Those are just the two things that the Army's concerned about through. So as you go forward, just from the Army's perspective, think about those and how the Army receives us going forward on that process. And I believe Bracken is talking on this on Friday, on next Monday as well too. So just from the Army's perspective, just those are the two things we're concerned about.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I got the one voice, but could you say your second point again?
Resilient utilities, so water and power primarily, but water here very specifically for our case out here in the West.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Garfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to bring up a couple, tell me if this is the time to do this, is that I have a couple of questions that apply to all of the plans, not just one
Okay.
or the other of them.
Let's wait on those. Let's hear from the public, and because they may have some of the same questions, and then we're gonna, we'll have to sort of take it from there, if that's all right. Any other clarifying questions on the specific plans, the one by one? Great, and I think LAFCO's in the room, and I think they heard the request that they speak. I think they have submitted correspondence to us, but if they would speak directly, that would be great, and we'll have you kick off the public comment portion of our meeting. So after Ms. McKenna, anyone else in the public who has questions or comments is welcome to speak.
Right. Thank you, Chair Parker and members of the board. I am Kate McKenna, Executive Officer of our LAFCO of Monterey County. You have received a letter that we provided earlier this week, and our appreciation to the FORA staff for distributing that to all of you. We want, first of all, to let you know we appreciate that all of the plans that are on the table right now have listened to some of the concerns that LAFCO has expressed over the past year about our appropriate role, limited role, and responsibilities in this portion of the transition planning process. We believe that all of these current plans that you are considering do acknowledge that and incorporate those comments. We have also taken a look, of course, at the current FORA staff plan, as well as the City of Marina plan, and I just breezed very, very fast through the latest plan provided by Supervisor Adams, and we believe that all of these plans do reflect many of the elements of what a transition plan needs to include. So we applaud all of the great progress that's been made in the last few weeks and months. We know that represents a lot of work. We think these plans are all basically workable frameworks. There are some fundamental differences. We at the LAFCO staff level, we're still in the process of trying to review and compare them, just as all of you are. But all of them have the basic structure of becoming good plans. And so I think with the dialogue that you're hearing today, we're beginning to understand collectively what the differences and similarities are in those plans so that you can make informed decisions. And it's my view that the most important folks here are really yourselves as stakeholders and the members of the public who need to weigh in on those similarities and differences. So we are very open to receiving any of these plans in coming weeks, and we know that regardless of which plan you select, a majority of your board will select, that we will work with you. We know that there's going to be a lot of evolving discussions over the coming year to implement, really to work on the details and to create local implementing agreements. It's my opinion that whatever plan we receive in coming weeks, there will probably be a need for our commission, our local agency formation commission, to provide a very detailed review and set of comments back to your FORA board and staff. And that those comments, together with the local discussions that will be happening over the next year, will then inform your FORA staff so that you can put together a final transition plan probably by summer or fall, and that's the version that my commission then would be able to adopt next fall. So basically we're very happy with all of the work that you are undertaking now, and we'll be pleased to work with any of these plans as a framework for the future. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone, who's the next speaker then from the public? If no one's going to come forward to speak, oh, I'm sorry. This is now the time for any public comment or questions on any or all of the plans.
My name is Margaret Davis. I'm the president of Friends of the Fort Ord Warhorse and a member of Fort Ord Rec Users. I urge you to adopt the Marina Plan. The Marina Plan is a judicious, reasoned, even elegant modification of the FORA Plan that makes it responsive to the attorneys group, LAFCO, and the environmental community, especially their concerns regarding transportation and water. Marina's plan crucially removes the challenges to the plan that assert that FORA is exceeding its authority to assign obligations. It is within the powers of LAFCO to implement. It does not ask LAFCO to enforce the unenforceable. It requires no potentially arguable or contentious patchwork of recitals. It gives cities the flexibility to implement their own CFD for habitat and other obligations, and the remaining funds be available for local priorities. It reduces the challenge by environmental groups, the risk of challenge by the environmental groups at a significant cost and time savings to us all, and has the best likelihood to be adopted by LAFCO and implemented. Please embrace a clear, orderly transition solution. Thank you.
Next speaker. This is public comment. I'm sorry, I have to speak strongly into the microphone.
Okay. Congratulations, Dominique. You've gone from a building department in the city of Seaside to whatever it is you're going to do in Santa Clara. Congratulations. Tom Mancini, I was reading this, and as usual, the waste of water is one of my particular issues. It says here on 2.27 that it's Marina Coast Water District has the responsibility to come up with a post-survival regarding water allocations. Over the years, we've heard other agencies say we will not have enough water. Well, if you're going to build an apartment, if you're going to build a 3-bedroom house in Seaside, you're going to get 0.17 or 0.18 acre-feet per year. If you build it in Marina, it's 0.33. If you're in your community, because Marina Coast Water District provides the allocation, it's going to cost you 0.33 acre-feet of water per year per dwelling unit. When these new houses went over, when these buildings went over here, with these new marina buildings, the developer was able to put in a lot of water-saving devices. So I think what you need to do is Marina Coast Water District needs to take a look at the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District's water allocation chart to determine, which will indicate that a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house built in using the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District's allocation form provides less water per unit. And so I think you need to take a look at that, and maybe people from Land Watch have always made a comment there's not enough water. Well, if you use an allocation that the user saves water, like 5 houses per dwelling unit and per acre in Monterey, 4 in Seaside, you only get 3 houses in Marina. So if you take a look at the allocations, you might find you're automatically going to reduce the amount of water that you're presently allocating out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker in public comment.
Fred Muir, the interim city manager or city administrator in Sand City. While our city doesn't have any land use jurisdiction, obviously what happens here is important to every single person in this room, and that was the reason for the creation of FORA in its very, very beginning. I would still argue that FORA hasn't completed its job, but I certainly understand you're doing your very best to follow the legislation that says come up with a transition plan. I get a little fearful when I hear the transition plan should be simpler, less complete, and we'll agree later. Based on what I've seen the last few years, that agreement later is going to be really tough. The leadership is here now. Keep your feet to the fire and do as much agreement as you can and articulate it in that agreement so everybody knows what the rules of the roads are. As you get closer, because you have to do this by legislation, I really suggest you look at the risk associated with doing what you're doing. A lot of what we're talking about today was talked about in 1994, the same disagreements by the same jurisdictions. And we came together as one to try and give that protection. As you start taking apart things, you're going to open up seams. And there are groups, some I support, some I would be not supportive of, but there'll be groups that will try to take advantage of those seams to achieve their much, I'll call it narrower objective than yours, which is for the whole region, not your individual jurisdictions. A couple of areas that I'm particularly concerned about, obviously, are the habitat management and the need, as Marina Rep talked about, in terms of being able to take advantage of the take rules if you have a complete plan. I'm also really concerned about Colonel Ford and his comments about one group. We seem to be moving away from being one group that the Army wants to deal with. But the other piece is water. I mean, I keep hearing this drumbeat that there's no water here, that this is paper water. The water that is pumped out of the wells here is just as wet as the water coming out of Marina's taps and Salinas' taps and so on, because it's coming from the groundwater basin. There is definitely a problem. There is no doubt about that. And it's a problem that we have the capability to solve. It's called build as large a desal plant as you possibly can and use other techniques to provide the water necessary for the build-out of FORA, the build-out of our general plans in the community, the protection of Salinas for nitrates, and saltwater intrusion. So I urge you, get as much detail as you can, because you're going to be arguing about those details that are not written down in the beginning when it goes to LAFCO. And as you get your plan done, make sure you ask your attorneys to look at the risks associated with not just changing the ending date. Nobody wants to just change the ending date.
Thank
but
you.
That two-digit date will be a lot easier than what you're doing now, I'm afraid.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment?
Good afternoon. My name is Paula Pillow. I've lived here on the fort for over 21 years. I am a Marina resident. And I'm here to speak broadly, and I'm sorry, Director Adams, I didn't have a chance to look at your plan, so I can't speak to that. My comments have to do with the staff plan versus the Marina alternative. And I support the Marina alternative because it's a comprehensive, equitable, economically and environmentally supportable, legislatively conforming, and enforceable transition plan that advantages all jurisdictions while bringing the FORA body to the required conclusion. I spent 25 years in government. I spent 10 years in criminal investigations. I ran 4 or 5 different county departments. I was a senior analyst and assistant department head for the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, Auditor Controller, elections, recorders, and county clerks. I tell you that not because I'm applying for a job, but I tell you that because I have had to read numerous times mind-numbing documents, and some of these are just that. Having done that, and of course exempting Director Adams' plan, I find that the Marina plan is clear, straightforward, intelligible, comprehensive, and not unnecessarily complex, and it advantages all jurisdictions while addressing the regional needs in the short and long term. And so I strongly urge this body to approve and direct that plan to LAFCO for consideration. Thank you.
Next speaker for public comment.
Good afternoon, board members. Doug Yount with Marina Community Partners, apparently probably the lone developer in the room. It's okay. I just wanted to say want to applaud those who have spent a significant amount of time, particularly at the elected official level, spending the time to learn and understand the issues. I know it's a lot to do and a lot to digest. So thank you for doing that. I applaud Marina particularly for putting together and understanding and asking difficult questions and being able to pull information that is kind of clear and concise with their plan and simplify but keep details and some of the information in there. Just three things that are important that didn't see, in my opinion, as much attention as needed as other sections got. One is water, and not from a standpoint of pro rata reduction should there be one, but looking at it from a glass, not even half full, but a glass full, water augmentation. What is the rules and regulations? What is the transition relative to water augmentation going forward? There's a little bit language in there, but in order to meet the base reuse plan fully, or even partially, there is some future augmentation. So water, the others, of course, no surprise here, there needs to be more definitive understanding of building removal liabilities and obligations going forward, which you're all becoming well versed in. Third is at some point, someone's going to have to talk about one of the two elephants in the room, and I'll only mention one of them, prevailing wage. At some point, you've got to get the hands around the issues of prevailing wage. Not a matter of removing, a matter of application, a matter of understanding, and a matter of providing a rational method for applying a prevailing wage to the Fort Ord development. Thank you.
Next speaker. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? All right, we'll close public comment. So this is a time we have about 35 minutes that's freely ours to discuss and come to some sort of level of agreement on what we want to send forward to LAFCO. So I think Director Garfield, you had a question you wanted to ask, and then Mr. Evelyn next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of issues that I think go across all plans, and I would suggest that we need to be a little bit more clear on them. The one of them that I don't see in any plan is the recourse if litigation funds set aside are insufficient. And nobody's addressed that. I don't know what the address should be, but I think if we're expecting in any way to go back to members, organizations for some ongoing liability for, we need to clarify that we're not going to do that right now. And that language needs to be in the plan. I don't know what that means. If there are litigation findings that exceed funds set aside, are those who won that judgment just out of luck? Or is there some other mechanism? But that's missing. In addition, I heard and wanted to first congratulate Director Adams. I went through her plan and checked off how it fulfilled elements of the staff plan, and just about everything was checked off. There was a direct corollary. The part that was less extensive was what I would refer to as the preface information, which if we look at it as a preface, we may have a good way to put that in there as not as part of the document, but as a preface to the document, and it gives context. And then I believe I heard you say that that would be a reasonable addition to what you've created. And then I think the fundamental difference that I'm hearing from all these plans is, what do we want to do with extra money? We are in total agreement that we want all of our pension obligations 100% satisfied. There's no doubt about that. Everybody says the same thing. The second one is that if there's money left over, Should it go directly to Habitat, or should it go to the CIP that's in play at the time, at June 30th? And it's just not a settled issue. That's a fundamental difference between, I would call, Marina's plan and the Adams plan, is that particular issue. I would favor continuing things that were already started and then going full bore to Habitat. But another alternative might be that funds are distributed as the CFD is divided currently, where 30% goes to Habitat, some goes to CIP, and so we continue the division that we've already set up as sort of a compromise. But as many compromises, it might not be a good solution. And I just want one clarification, is that when we talked about the taxes that would be encumbered to finally meet the last bit of the pension obligations, would that be FORA's share of the current collection of property taxes? It's not everybody's. Okay, I'm getting a nod from Mr. Hulamar that is the share that has been going to FORA would continue to be set aside to meet that pension obligation, correct?
If that were a debt, and that's the reason part for this distribution that talks about the health and safety code, if there's a debt at the time, it could be used for those purposes. And I think Sherry mentioned that there may be some disagreements in the fine tunes about how those funds can be applied, but that was the idea.
Okay, but nowhere in any of the plans does it specify that that's FORA's share of property taxes. It just says property taxes. And so I think that's a clarification we all need to have running through that. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Edelin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. All of the directors that have submitted plans, worked on the plans, and brought them forward deserve a lot of credit for the hard work, dedication, and in trying to solve the Gordian's knot of getting everybody to agree. That being said, the FORA staff plan, transition plan 12-6, is the one that really offers the most flexibility. It's been legally reviewed by the Authority Council and CEQA attorney. The other two have not. And if it's adopted, it has the least risk of having a successful lawsuit put against it. Basically, we've run out of time. And because of that, I'd like to basically move staff recommendation, which is to find that the approval of the FORA Transition Plan 12-6 is a mere organizational change and not a project subject to CEQA, that we approve the transition plan for 12-6 and set up a special meeting if necessary in December 19th, 2018, if the transition plan is resolution or not unanimously approved, which is probably going to be the case. And finally, to authorize staff to take appropriate action to comply with state law requiring submittal of an approved transition plan to the LAFCO by December 2018. We've run out of time, and it's time to really take a stand here. And if we approve the staff plan itself, it's not the be-all and end-all. It can be modified. It's like Gumby. It can be moved around. And the admin committee would probably be the best place to start any type of answering questions or approvals in the future.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor and a second, so discussion can continue. Either on the motion or however you want to handle this. Yes, Director Garfield.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out my thanks to LAFCO for clarifying the flexibility we're going to be able to go forward with. I think regardless of what we do, that was really welcome news.
Great. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Reimers.
I would also like to just echo my appreciation for the time and the energy and the hard work for everyone around the table as they've looked at these different processes and tried to wrestle with the decision making, and I appreciate it and thank you all for all of your work.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Adams and then Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's hard work, but I specifically want to. Is Sherry still here? There she is. I want to just call you out specifically because you've had nothing but worms. Honestly, you have just really taken a very complex, very difficult, contentious issue and have made just such a great effort and a really very good document that you have brought forward. And I publicly want to say how much I appreciate everything that you've done on this. I really do. I also, though, however, want to come back and try to figure out how to do this correct, because I'm interested in making a substitute motion, and I do this urging you to consider the Adams document, because I want to see us have a 100% vote on this today. And I'm fearful that the staff recommendation will not get a 100% vote, but I believe that the compromise that we've made, pulling in some of the Marina comments, would be able to come out with a 100% vote. And I personally feel like that is an important thing for us as a body, as a group, to be able to accomplish.
Sorry, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? All right, I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
Thank you.
All right, so then Mr. O'Connell wanted to speak, and then Ms. Reinheimer had something to say.
So is my understanding that Board Member Adams was just making a substitute motion, is that correct?
Yes.
I would like to make a second substitute motion. I probably assumed that that would be done. That the recommendations from the staff be incorporated, except that the adoption be of the what is called the Marina Transition Plan to be sent to LAFCO as required by December 30th, 2018, and that the recommendations number 2, 3, and 4 that were on the slide presentation also be part of the motion.
Okay, we now have another motion and second on the floor. Discussion can continue. Ms. Reinheimer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. MST did provide comments on basically blanket all transition plans, so I don't anticipate or think that my comments here will influence your vote today. And really what it's about for us is the particular quandary that we're in moving forward in a post-FORA world, and that is MST does not have land use authority. MST does not have an authority to be able to collect fees as you all do. So the particular project that we're concerned about most is the project that we had identified in the comment letter, which is bus replacements. We do not have an ability to replace that monies through our normal funding mechanisms, so we would have to delay replacement of buses that have reached their useful life, extending our cost to maintain those vehicles when this particular funding goes away. So I wanted to highlight that for you. And in a post-FORA world, MST would look to the jurisdictions to help us fund those replacement vehicles, or alternatively, if you wanted to, in the next years of the CIP before FORA sunsets, program all those monies into those current and pre-June 2020 years, and we could retire those obligations immediately. So I'd like to raise those issues for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Hoffa.
Well, so before I was going to say I could support Supervisor Adams' proposal if she included the recitals. I think it's really important that the recitals that were in the staff plan, I think that should there be litigation, and I think it's likely there will be all kinds of litigation, I think that those recitals being part of the transition plan will help defend the plan and defend the actions that we take. And so I could support your motion when we get to it if those were included, and I'm not sure if the two of you can amend it, but that's just where I'm at.
Let's wait on that until we're talking. That one's actually on the table. Dr. Moore, just a second. One question I want to put out for the board's consideration is, regardless of which plan we approve or adopt, is there interest in, because one of the questions that has come up as not being resolved in any of the plans, perhaps adequately, is the what if the $300,000 litigation is not sufficient? LAFCO has asked us to put in $500,000. I still think the question of if there is more money needed, who's going to pay for it, and basically what's hanging out there is member jurisdictions. So I would propose maybe we think about $1 million, some amount of money to put into that litigation fund that will just be an amount that is closer to maybe being able to cover those expenses, which can eliminate most of the worry of the member jurisdictions. So when it comes time to vote, if that's something that would be of interest in any of the plans, I just think it might be something to put forward. Dr. Moore, and then Ms. Reimers, and then Dr. Ochoa.
So I don't know what is ground truth, and maybe attorneys can weigh in on this, but I just spent an hour and a half earlier this week on 2 attorneys from a national nonprofit of which I am a member. I'm trying to get their board of directors to publish more transactional information of board agendas, board minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And basically the bottom line that I heard from these 2 attorneys was, why would we want to do that? The more words we publish, the more likely we're going to give somebody an ability to sue us over those particular words. So I don't know what's ground truth, and I haven't taken out a scale and weighed the 3 plans to see which might have more ink in them. But whatever extent that weighs in your decision making on this, 2 attorneys felt at a national nonprofit pretty strongly about that.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Ms. Reimers and then Dr. Ochoa.
Okay. I'm concerned that we're trying to rewrite parts of this without the background and the review from our staff and from the legal counsel and from the CEQA attorneys as far as additional funding, as far as where these funds are coming from, this sort of thing. Those are the kinds of things that can be determined as we go forward. After we get this plan put forward, we can make some adjustments, I think, that in those sorts of deliberations. So I'm very concerned about writing it on the fly as we sit around this table. I support the staff and the fact that it's been vetted by the attorneys and by the CEQA attorneys, and I feel that we have that backing with that plan that I'm not entirely clear we have as well thought out as the others are. I don't have this secure feeling that we have that same backing with those plans, and I'm not entirely sure we can't be sued in any plan we go forward with. I would like that guarantee.
When you get that figured out, let us know. Yeah, Dr. Ochoa.
I really second Supervisor Adams' desire to achieve consensus in this group. I think it's remarkable how much progress we've made in the last month or 2. Nothing like a deadline. But it does give me hope that it is possible, if we have more time, that we could actually fully achieve consensus. And so at this point, however, we have a deadline where we have to adopt a plan. And so what I would propose as a sort of a filtering device for assessing which plan to support would be, which is the plan that provides the best foundation from which we could continue to work together to achieve full consensus on all the details. Because clearly we've run out of time in terms of coming to a consensus. So why don't we just zero in on the document that can provide the best base for moving forward and achieving that consensus at a somewhat later date. I was really taken by the fact that looking at the recitations on the staff plan of the overriding considerations that underlie the reuse plan, and I still think that all of us would share all of those considerations. We all support those goals. So we still have the same goals. And it's just a matter of, and we've shown that we can come closer to achieving consensus in how to achieve those goals. So I would just put it to you, which plan of these 3 can we agree on now so that we meet our deadline and provides a basis for moving forward and finalizing, reaching consensus?
Thank you. All right, any other board members wanting to discuss? Yes, Director Morton.
Yes, I think Ms. Reimers is correct about trying to change to $1 million, because my question was, is that 500 for the LAFCO process and 500 for general liabilities. I think we need to give that a little more thought, but I think all of us are saying we need to take care of things. The other thing that I just wanted to be clear is that when the marina plan was reviewed by FORA's CEQA attorney, there was not an understanding that Exhibit A, which our Exhibit A is in your packet, says is the FORA list of contracts. We just did not retype the entire list. So that legal opinion was based on thinking there was no list. And they didn't see that the FORA list was being incorporated. So I don't give a great deal of credibility to that challenge to our proposed plan. Our plan versus Supervisor Adams' plans are very similar. Two distinct differences. One, her plan prioritizes the transportation over habitat. Marina is not vested either way. But the idea about the habitat is the jurisdictions need to decide if our CFD is going to fund that base-wide taking for the HCP, and if we don't need all of that money, which remember that we've already earmarked 30.2% that has to go into that. Our plan also this is the unexpended money that we were saying fund the habitat conservation plan with, is the unexpended money. So we already are looking at that the South Boundary Road would be built. You're already in a contract that's in our CIP that is going to happen and be done. So it's not a difference. It's a difference in if there's extra money, the unexpended money. Right. So I don't think the city of Marina, we've taken a city position, but we still were given the discretion. So if it's transportation first, it's still the discretion of this board because we think South Boundary Road is going to be funded. But the thing that I do have a great deal of objection to is the recitations. As Ms. Damon said, that the recitations are to build an administrative record. And that's the problem that Marina has, I personally have, is that there are many disagreements with what are these recitations. We don't think all of them are completely accurate, and they're not necessary for a plan going forward. That if, in fact, Supervisor Adams' program can remove the recitations, not add them in as being asserted, it may be able that we can come to using that plan as a go forward. But the recitations, building a record, we're just establishing challenges that, or misinterpretation of those facts may be incomplete, inaccurate, when we're asking that that be looked at in any challenge to the transition plan. We see that as a mistake in the city of Marina.
Thank you. Any other discussion at the moment? Yes, Director Oglesby.
Thank you. Of course, I haven't been here for a while, but I understand what's going on. But I don't think we all understand what's going on right now. How many plans do you have in front of you? Count 5, because it's moving. And so when we talk about what we're going to vote on, which one are we going to vote on? Because right now, some plans have been added to in the last 15 minutes that has not been thought through. And I agree with all the directors. They did a heck of a job thinking through these things on their own, by themselves, in their communities, in their offices, to bring it forward. But right now, we don't know where their plan puts us. And so we have the staff plan, we have Marina's plan, we have Director Adams' plan, then we have Marina plus Director O'Connell's add. Then we have what Director Hoffa wants to add to the Adams plan. And so we have to go back to something a little simpler. And that's just my 2 comments, because I really wanted to say I appreciate all the directors thinking through these things, but I think what they did made staff's plan better. And if we can adopt the staff's plan and add in, well, not add, but make the adjustments as we go forward, I think we will continue to go forward. But we're not going to get consensus tonight. But I don't know how we can get consensus on a plan that we just all made within the last 20 minutes. That's what I want us to think about. But I really wanted to appreciate the directors making us do a better job.
Thank you. So if the board is prepared, why don't we start working our way through these motions? All right, so we do have a motion on the floor. This one is in support of the Marina transition plan, essentially. Probably we should do a roll call vote, please.
Director Parker?
Yes.
Director O'Connell?
Yes.
Director Morton?
Yes.
Director Phillips?
No.
Director Adams?
No.
Director Oglesby? Director Wizard?
No.
Director Hoffa? Director Edelin? Director Reimers?
No.
Director Carbone?
No.
Director Garfield?
No.
Director Gunter?
No.
It's 10-3.
Thank you. The next motion, yes, Dr. Ochoa, just a second. The motion next is the approval of the Adams plan, and Dr. Ochoa has a
Yeah, I just
comment.
had a question, point of order.
Sure.
Did we just vote whether or not to substitute that motion for the main motion, or did we actually vote on the substitute motion?
We voted on the substitute motion.
Okay.
Right. The second substitute motion. Now we'll move to the first substitute motion, which is the Adams plan. Is there any further discussion on this item? All right, roll call vote, please.
Director Parker?
Yes.
Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Morton?
No.
Director Phillips?
No.
Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Oglesby? Director Wizard? Director Hoffa? Director Edelin? Director Reimers? Director Carbone?
No.
Director Garfield?
Yes.
Director Gunter?
No.
It's 4-9.
All right, thank you. So now we have, the motion before us is the support of the FORA staff plan. Is there any further discussion on this plan? So I have just a couple of things. Let's see, so many of the concerns that that county staff and I think MST have raised are things that we can and should make sure get dealt with, and so I will mention those maybe after we vote as I remember them. But there are a couple of things that are that I want to see if the members are willing to consider. So in section 2.1.5, this is the use of leftover CIP funds, and towards the end of it's on page 8 of the original plan. I don't know where it is on the errata. Towards the bottom, basically it says that the capital improvement funds shall be transferred to the jurisdiction assigned responsibility for completing construction of the respective project, which shall be the jurisdiction in which the majority of the project is located. I'd like the sentence to end there, because it goes on to say, if that jurisdiction has executed a transition plan implementing agreement, and then if there's no agreement, I just think that if there is a project that's in a jurisdiction.
Point of order.
Yeah.
My understanding is that you are on a motion.
Mhm.
So I don't understand what's going on right now.
So what's going on right now is a request to the maker and seconder of the motion if they would consider amending the motion to include a couple of changes. Is that procedurally, am I all right? Okay. So what I'm asking is, it seems to me that if the project is in a jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction is going to go forward with the project, if there's any money available for that project, it should go to the jurisdiction, regardless of a transition plan agreement. So that's one. Let me. Sure.
Your intentions are honorable, but I can't accept that.
Okay.
So I'd rather keep the motion the way it is, pure.
Thank you.
And then we can, down the road, if the board here wants to consider other things, there's modifications while they can, but I'd like to keep it pure.
Okay, so that would indicate that you would not be open to deleting another sentence. Let me just say what it is for the record, and then you can tell me no. So in 2.2.6, this was a point that was raised earlier. There's a sentence about in the middle of the paragraph that says, those reimbursement agreements shall terminate on June 30th, 2020, unless otherwise addressed in the transition plan implementing agreements. The county staff was interested in having that sentence deleted. Thank you.
Keep it pure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, those were the changes I was going to try to make, and then I think after we vote, I think it would be helpful to just speak out some of the issues that we're aware of at the moment that will need, such as MSTs, things that are not resolved but can be worked out later. I mean, there's a list at least this long, but any that were raised today that you want to be sure are, or that are in your mind that you want to be sure are captured for future reference. So we have a pure motion on the floor and a second. Yes, Mr. Hoffa.
So I wanted to really thank everyone who has been working on various versions of a plan. And, I think we're at the point now where the staff plan actually incorporates a lot of our concerns. I know that the Parker Garfield Hoffa plan, many of our recommendations were incorporated into it. I think they tried to work with Marina, incorporate some of their concerns, Land Watch, KFOW, other directors and jurisdictions and lawyers. It would be great, even though not everyone loves every aspect of this plan, it would be great if we could have a unanimous vote so that we don't have to come back in a week or two.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion?
Well, I want to say that I agree with Dr. Ochoa that we came a long way from where we were 3 weeks or a month ago, and I think Sherry's done an amazing job of pulling in ideas and suggestions from the other entities, and I agree too that we're going to have some issues that we're going to have to deal with down the road. Some were brought up by the county staff, and some there. So there are some things that we're going to have to keep working on. I think we all agree to that. So,
thank you. Anyone else wishing to comment? Yes, Director
I know
Adams.
he wants to keep his motion pure. I mean, there are just a couple of things. Just a couple of things. Just two things. That's all. Just two things.
Yeah, I want to keep it pure, but everybody keeps saying, I keep coming back over and over and over again like an STD or something, but that's another story.
That's the second time I've heard that joke from you. It was old the first time I heard it.
I never heard that.
Did you want to? He's just shutting you down without hearing. Do you want to say it anyway?
Do you want to hear my? Do you want to hear my? I'll say it anyway, and that is that there. And I wish I could point to exactly where it is, but it was two things, and one was having a 5-person panel, sort of taking the authority away from this body of people and having it go to a 5-person panel to make the decisions essentially as we go forward from the work that we're doing today as we go through till 2020. So that was it. I want to keep it a bigger group. That was one of the issues. I see a show of hands of who would agree to just taking that out. And let me just see if do you remember what the other part was? What the-
While the hunting is in process, could I ask the maker of the motion if you are intending that the errata be included in be that version of the plan? Okay, thank you. And the seconders, I can't remember who seconded. Seconders, okay, great. And Mr. Gunter will get to you as soon as Ms. Adams is finished.
I found the other one. And it was I think it's in 2.26 on page 11. And it had to do with essentially you had to have a transition plan implementing agreement if you wanted to be included in any kind of revenue distribution. So those were the two things so it was the TPIA and the 5-person panel. Those were the two things that I would like to see amended. And if you could go along with that, we'd sell plan.
Thank you. Director Gunter.
I think the reason that I asked for LAFCO to speak is so that everybody understands LAFCO is going to work with this group no matter what plan we submit. And we know that this plan is going to be back at this board every meeting until FORA either ends or develops under a new name. And so no one's going to get everything they want today, whether it be the Marina plan, Supervisor Adams' plan, the staff plan, or Mary Ann Carbone and I were working on one where we forgot to bring it. I think what we got to do here today is, and this is very difficult because one thing about this group of personalities, we all have our own thoughts on how things should be, but I think this is an opportunity that we're going to vote and it's not done. And I hope nobody thinks this is the end of this because this is no way. So thank you.
Ms. Parker?
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Adams.
So I agree with what you've just said, Mr. Mayor. I think the other thing that's problematic here is that I believe that there are some of us sitting around this table who believe that if we vote for this, that's what's going to happen. And the comment that you made about this is a work in progress and we're going to be able to come back, I'm fearful that the trust level at this point in this group among the various members is not to the degree that would allow people to vote believing that we will come back and, for me, example, revisit the 5-person panel and the implementing agreements. And I feel like that's something that is that little elephant in the middle of the room.
Call for the question.
Dr. Ochoa, and then there's been a call for the question. We can vote about whether we want to vote.
I just wanted to respond to Supervisor Adams. I think that the work that all of us have been doing in the past month or two should justify trust that we're going to continue to work together and reach a consensus because we share the ultimate goals. Let's keep that in mind.
Great. There has been a call for the question. All those prepared to vote? Please let me know. Anyone? Okay, it looks like a majority. So the motion we have before us is it remains pure. It is the FORA staff December 6th transition plan. No, it's not. It's the FORA staff transition plan with errata and the other elements of the staff recommendation. Roll call vote, please.
Director Parker? Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Morton?
No.
Director Phillips?
Yes.
Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Oglesby? Director Wizard? Director Hoffa? Director Edelin? Director Reimers? Director Carbone?
Yes.
Director Garfield?
Yes.
And Director Gunter?
Yes.
It's 11-2.
Thank you. We have a transition plan that has been passed by a majority vote. We will look, I wonder if directors could just check your calendars right now, if you have them with you, whether a meeting on Wednesday the 19th at 4 o'clock is possible for a second vote.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Is it possible, I mean, I've had some discussions earlier, I won't be here, but other folks will, and
Right.
they're asking if there's a possibility since it's only a second vote, to call in, to set up a telephone vote, rather than having people come all the way in from Salinas and other outlying areas. It might, especially during the Christmas period.
Council, would you like to give us an opinion on that?
Well, I'll give you Executive Officer's opinion. People definitely can call in, and we've done that before, and when it's published appropriately, they also count towards the quorum. So if that's your desire, we need to make that decision now, and the clerk would have to post it that way. Well, it's a special meeting, so, right.
We will properly notice the motion to allow for
Okay.
call-in.
I think the challenge for the noticing is on the end of the caller in. You need to be in a public place, that it'll need to be posted there. So that's the challenge, but I think that's, sounds like we can.
There are really specific requirements that that are required. Everybody has to be able to hear one another when they're listening from a telephone, and I believe you also have to post at the location where you are from, so that and that has to be open to the public.
And
So there are some significant hurdles.
So, all right, so, yes, Ms. Ramers.
Just to clarify, it would be either a phone in or be present? Okay, so those of us who wouldn't want to be posting in our front door that we're having a meeting could actually come in.
It has
Is
to
that
be open
correct?
to the public.
It has to be open to the public, okay. Those who don't want our front door open, okay.
Okay, so December 19th at 4 o'clock is the time. All right, so let me just quickly see if I can run through a couple of the things that are sort of the open issues that were raised, that some people were hoping could be, yes.
We probably
All right,
need a motion
so-
to extend if we're going to conduct further business.
Okay, so.
Including public comment on
Oh,
items
right,
not
right.
on the agenda.
So can I have a motion to continue the meeting for a period of time to hear from the public? That's the main
I'll
thing
move
we
that
need to do.
motion.
Okay, so.
For the public
For the
comment.
public, yeah,
Start
through
right now.
public comment, 10 minutes at the most kind of thing, or however long they take.
long it takes.
Okay,
Sure.
good. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Good. Well, we'll move directly then to public comment. Anyone in the public wishing to speak on any item not on today's agenda? All right. Then we will adjourn, and we'll see many of you on the 19th. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Weren't we going to try and make a list of the things that we think are
That's
still
what I
relevant
thought, too.
issues?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But
Okay.
we've lost people.
Well,
Can we do that on the 19th? I mean, that would be.
Sure.
Email them in or bring them up on the 19th. I think that would
Okay.
work. Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
But again, you're cautioned against serial meetings. Right?
No, she just listed.
Okay.